Hello and welcome back to the Strength with G podcast. I'm here today with a very exciting guest. I have Natacha with me, who is a sports psychologist, and it's great to have you here. So thank you for making time for this, Natacha. And could I ask you to do a little intro to yourself for people who don't know you, a bit about your background and your current work?
Hi everyone, I'm super happy to be here to start with, so it's going to be a great conversation. My name's Natacha Lazareff, and I'm a sport and exercise psychologist on a pathway for accreditation and chartership with CASES, the Chartered Association for Sport and Exercise Sciences. And my area of specialization and interest is endurance and extreme sports. And part of that, the reason for that, is that those are the kind of sports that I like to do myself. And so I guess that's why I'm here to talk a little bit more about parkour, even though I'm more into climbing and those kind of extreme sports. I am also the director of the Performance Psychologist, a performance psychology consultancy, and I work with individuals, teams, both athletes, but also other high performers to basically support them in performing to their optimal level, whatever that means for them. So it could be performing under pressure, it could be managing fear or stress, a whole lot of different mental experiences there to work through, which is so interesting. And I particularly love working with women and other, shall I say, marginalized communities, because I really want these worlds of sport to be sport, business, other, let's say, high performance areas to be more welcoming, and so that everybody can feel that they have a place there and that they can forge their own pathway. So that's a bit about
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Amazing. Good. And very pertinent to be talking to you then about this and about parkour, which I think you've seen a few videos from me and a few things I've sent you. So you have some context as to kind of what we do when we are out training. In parkour, fear shows up a lot. It can be quite an individual experience, but also there's a lot of sort of threads that connect us in how we experience it. So I'm excited to pick your brains today and hear about even some strategies that people can use to help stay more consistent with their training and manage fear. One thing that's come up a lot, and to kind of describe it, is that sensation of when someone's looking at a jump. It could be a jump, it could be a more complex movement than just a jump, but where you kind of have to really commit to this movement. Once you go, and you need to stay committed, and it's actually more risky to change your mind halfway, which maybe there is some parallels in climbing as well. But that feeling of sort of seeing a jump, knowing you can do it and you want to do it, but actually you find your body freezes, fear kicks in, and kind of what to do in those situations. Because I know I've kind of swayed between sticking with it, and sometimes the outcome is positive and you do eventually do the jump. But other times, actually, that can be really draining, and draining of your energy and maybe draining of your training time. And it could be actually more sensible to understand within the first 10 minutes, am I going to do this? Am I not going to do the jump? And if not, then moving on to something else.
I think the first thing to acknowledge here is that it's a really difficult situation to be in, and it is uncomfortable, and that's totally okay. You've got to bring acceptance to the fact that, if you are putting yourself in these challenging situations, it's going to be hard, and that's okay. That's part of the process. To answer your question, I would say the very first element is that thought or feeling helpful in a moment? And that can be sometimes a really difficult question to answer. And it comes back to the idea of understanding where the limits of our competence lie. But ultimately, we get a whole lot of thoughts that are emotional thoughts and that are not actually rational and are not helpful. And we don't want to be necessarily paying those thoughts a lot of attention. So we there's a psychological kind of framework that's called the threat versus challenge state. And what happens is that when we are faced with a difficult situation, our first appraisal is this potentially dangerous? Which I suspect in the situations you're talking about, yes, the answer is yes. Then the second appraisal of the situation is, can I handle it? Do I have the resources to handle it? And here, if you think you do, then you're going to appraise the situation as a challenge, and you'll have positive emotions as a result. You'll be excited, you'll feel committed, you'll go for it, and you'll feel all round more positive and more likely to want to move through that initial doubt, let's say. Now, if you appraise it as, no, I don't have the resources to handle this situation, then you're going to feel stressed and you're going to have a threat response. And that's where the fear really kicks in and is debilitating. And what's interesting in between these two appraisals, the only difference is your perception of your resources. So that's why things like confidence are so important, because if you have these limiting thoughts of self-doubt, self-criticism, and they are not representative of your real ability, then they will really hinder your performance in a way that's a bit of a shame. Does that make sense? Have I answered your question there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And
if I then
therefore,
answer...
working on
Oh,
your
sorry.
confidence.
I think there's a little bit of a
Yeah, please
delay.
do.
Can you hear
I'll
me?
let you go. Go ahead. Yes, I can hear you. There is a slight delay, but I'm going to let you carry on.
To answer the second part of the question, what can you do about it, is actually work on those thoughts. So my approach to sports psychology is embedded in CBT, which means that we believe that thoughts have a massive impact on your emotions that then have a big impact on your behavior and your actions. And that's a kind of vicious circle: thoughts, emotions, behavior, or action. And so what we want to do is work on accepting these thoughts, these unhelpful thoughts, but then redirecting our attention to the action we want to take and our values and our goals. Say, okay, I understand that my mind is feeding me these thoughts and it's trying to keep me safe. And actually, in the context of parkour and climbing and any of these other extreme sports, I think it makes a lot of sense that your mind is telling you not to do what you're trying to do. You know, it's not natural for human beings to be jumping off roofs or hanging off a cliff edge. So you can understand where these thoughts are coming from, but your first question is this helpful to me right now? Is it giving me useful information? Is a fear telling me? And that's why I never talk about positive or negative thoughts or emotions. I talk about helpful and unhelpful thoughts and emotions, because fear can be really helpful sometimes. It can be very protective. Look, this is not within my ability. You're going to kill yourself. But that's, you know, if you haven't practiced, if you haven't trained, that's probably right. So by being able to learn the skill of, and it is really a skill that you've got to practice, of taking a bit of distance from those thoughts and emotions. We call it unhooking from these thoughts, and being able to acknowledge them, but then let them go if they're not helpful, and then refocus your attention towards being present in a moment and gathering information that's going to be helpful for that jump. And then reminding yourself of your values, who you want to be as a person, how you want to what kind of attitude you want to bring to your parkour, and where this is taking you towards what goal it's taking you, then all of that is going to be a much more helpful process. And this is one of the things that I would say is probably quite difficult to do on your own, and where probably the support of somebody who can help you build those skills along the way is helpful. But really, I want to kind of emphasize the fact that you don't need to engage with every single thought that comes through your brain. And the more you engage with them, the longer they'll stay and the more impact they'll have. Doesn't mean you're ignoring them. It doesn't mean that you're, trying to make them go away. You're acknowledging that they're there. They are uncomfortable, but they don't need to have an impact on you if they're not going to be helpful for you.
That's amazing. That is very, very useful for me personally to hear as well. And I think in the past I have very much thought too much about things and attached too much weight to those thoughts. A few things came to mind, and one is like, because we might be talking about the same thing, but let's take for a second the example, one of which I sent you, of in our sport in parkour, there have been some cases, there are many cases all the time, of people doing stuff that is like amazingly impressive, but like that must take so much commitment and detachment from that fear that it's almost impossible to believe it's happened, but it has happened, and most of the time successfully, and the person is absolutely fine. But where people must have overridden that fear so much to actually even go for it. And I don't know, my question I guess to you is that just a journey they've been on and they've got to the point of exactly what you just described, and that's all that's happening? They're just further along or at a different stage in that journey, and for them that jump is relative, and to them it's not as big as it is to the viewer. Or is there something else? Is there, as you see in extreme sports like BMX or climbing or parkour, is there also some people just kind of can switch off the fear and, I don't know, do something different that is maybe reckless, but when it goes well, it's fine? I don't know.
I think there's no easy way of answering that question, and you have a good point there. There will be a mix of both, and if it's being done well, it will be the former. It will be somebody who is actually operating within their growth zone, so not too far off their comfort zone. They've built it up. It's exposure, basically. And I've seen it a lot through your videos where you're actually starting with jumps that are not that far off the ground. There is basically, you're reassuring your brain that there is margin for error. If something goes wrong, then, the consequences are not dramatic. And then you're gradually just bringing the risk level up incrementally, little by little. And hopefully that is really the healthiest way and the most sustainable way. And I think that's what everybody should be aiming for. And that is also a way that's totally under your control. And I think one of the examples I like to use is Alex Honnold. So I don't have the same, I don't know that many parkour, amazing parkour athletes. So my references don't really lie within the parkour world. But Alex Honnold, I think everybody knows him. He's the one who did free solo. He climbs these crazy, crazy mountains and cliff faces without a rope. And I think the example with him is that he is operating within his comfort zone, maybe just outside of his comfort zone, in that growth zone, which is, it's challenging, but it's within his capabilities. And so therefore it sounds crazy to us because our comfort zones are so much lower, but for him that makes sense. So in a way, I think that's maybe the boring response, right? Because we like this idea that some people are just doing these crazy things. But I think it's a bit of we've got to be a bit careful with that whole narrative of just flicking off the fear switch and just going for things. Fear is there for a reason, and it's to keep us safe. And so we don't want to be detached from that fear response. It's not a good idea. And I think a big element of the world we live in, the world we operate in these extreme sports, is being able to understand when we are too far out of our limits. And it might be impressive for other people, but it's ultimately not great for survival, which I would say is still a number one priority. So with that video, I know you sent me that video of the young man doing a stunt over. I mean, he was doing some kind of I don't know what do you call it, like a flip, right?
Yeah, a cork. It's called a cork, yeah, over a gap. But the gap was both the one he covered and there was a gap beyond his landing as well. So it was very like you had to land on this one strip. And most people who do commit to things like that in parkour, the videos you see, they do land it. It might freak you out and be like, whoa, that's risky, but they do land it. Whereas that clip specifically, he doesn't. Like, he does land it because he's all right, but he lands it kind of not how we would normally land a jump. And that's what's quite scary, because it's like, are people really pushing the limit of this could end badly?
Absolutely. And I think you've got to also realize that we have some survivorship bias going on. I don't know if, so survivorship bias is this idea of like, wow, well, look, it works for everybody. Look at all of these examples of people it's worked for. But then you don't see all of the examples of the people it hasn't worked for. You're probably unlikely to have a video go viral of somebody who falls to their death from missing their jump, right? Maybe in this day and age that would go viral. I don't know. So
I don't know, but yeah, I wouldn't watch it. And
exactly. So then you get this idea of you're seeing this tiny amount of content that has gone right out of luck, and so then you then generalize it as something that is the norm, when actually that's not correct. The real problem is when, you know, a lot of people who get into these worlds of extreme sports, and they have an addiction to their adrenaline that comes from, and you know, I don't say an addiction in necessarily a bad way, but there is something incredible about. So what happens when you get the fear response is that the amygdala, which is the smoke alarm of our brain, will fire off and say, oh my God, watch out, there's something, you know, high alert, we've got to be careful, there's a potentially dangerous situation here. And then it releases cortisol, the stress hormone, and adrenaline. And that adrenaline, the whole point of it is for us to have like tensed muscles, you know, heightened senses, so that we are ready basically to fight or flight. And that can feel really energizing. But people also can get rather addicted to that and then push it too far. So I would say, and my question is, how do you do it, Georgia? You're the parkour coach here. You're the parkour athlete. What do you think? What would you prefer?
I think what you've said makes a lot of sense. Of like, you always want to be on a path of improvement. So you always want to be growing and kind of pushing that comfort zone that little bit further. My experience at the moment is hugely, and the whole focus at the moment of my training is that physically I am capable of a lot more than what my brain or my mind thinks. So I know that, and I've had lots of positive reinforcements in my physical capacity that should only tell me like, you can absolutely do this, X, Y, Z. And so now my training is around bridging that gap. And there'll always be, I think, a slight gap of like what you're able to push yourself to do and what you physically can do. For most people, I think there'll always be that, maybe if not all. But if my gap right now is maybe like quite large, then my goal is to kind of make that gap smaller. So have the resources, the toolkit that like I can land it, I can even slightly bounce the jump, I can even roll out of it and be fine because my physical capabilities are so high. But now it's reminding my brain, or kind of to some extent switching off all that self-doubt, or accepting that self-doubt and saying, yeah, but actually it's not helpful right now. And actually every time I do go for something that really scares me, I usually land it more than perfectly, or, perfectly. So it's almost like a friend of mine uses a phrase saying, like, I'm overqualified for the jump, like I should have done it already. Which is a comfort place to be. You're safe, but it is sort of holding you back a little bit.
And what you're doing there by that gradual exposure and building up that evidence that you're capable of doing this is dampening your amygdala, dampening that response from your amygdala, the smoke alarm. And it's learning. So we have another part of the brain called the hippocampus, and that's the memory. It provides a memory context for all of these jumps, and it will remember and recognize that you've done similar jumps and you've landed them correctly, and so that's going to dampen the response from the amygdala and dampen the fear response. And we've got to be honest, some people just like genetically, naturally have less of a fear response. They, going back to Alex Honnold's, when they've done, imagery scanning of his brain, they saw that his amygdala just has got a very low or a very high tolerance to danger. And that might be something that's trained. It's definitely trainable, but there might be an element of people can start off at a higher point because that's genetics as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So there could be some people that are slightly more, when we look at talent and high level athletes, there could also be some element of some people are kind of more predisposed or more suitable to certain sports because of that slightly dampened amygdala response.
I would say they just have it's a bit like they're just starting from a different starting point. And it might explain why they are attracted to those sports in the first place. But it definitely doesn't mean you can't train it. And sometimes when you start from a higher standing point, it can be counterintuitive because it's all pretty easy at the start. And then finally you have to face up to that discomfort a bit further down the line.
A question on that, because it's interesting, in parkour we also have, I've seen it firsthand, that it also attracts a lot of people who are on the opposite end of the spectrum, that maybe have a lot of fear and have a lot of lack of confidence in their body and in what they can do physically, in their physical abilities. And actually parkour seems to attract a lot of people like that as well. In my beginner classes or beginner courses I've run, actually often people come to parkour having not done any sport. Is there potentially an attraction to extreme sports for people who maybe, without even fully realizing it, want to improve in that sense of fear where they're scared of everything, and maybe this is maybe like an exposure technique to that?
I think that's a very interesting point. I would never have realized that it attracted people who might be more prone to fear in their everyday life. I think that's what you're saying, right? Or who might not be who might have not had an exposure to extreme sports before. It's a way of challenging yourself in a more structured environment. And I'd say in our current society, there's a lot of push around with all of these ice bars, for example, it's quite similar. You're pushing that threat response, but in a very structured environment. So I guess that might be it. And another element is that people feel like there's very little pressure on them and they have no expectations of what their abilities are. And so that might be really helpful actually for someone. Whereas if you're super fit and you come from another extreme sport background, you might have these high expectations of what you should be able to achieve. And that can be quite limiting.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. That makes sense. Just to move on to the next part, which we talked a little bit about consistency. I'm gonna mention both questions. So there was one question that was about how could I improve, kind of for want of another term, forcing myself. How can I improve in forcing myself to go out and train when there's sunny days? I've got more free time. I know I'll enjoy the session once I start, but I don't want to start, especially if I'm on my own. And I end up just avoiding having the session at all. But on the flip side, a different person sent me a question asking about how do I manage FOMO, like fear of missing out, and when actually I'm trying to go through a few days or a week of recovery, and how can I manage my recovery whilst also having this fear of missing out. So yes, I put those two questions together, and I think you had a thought on how to reply to both, actually.
Absolutely. The first thing I'd say is that, once again, I just want to normalize that experience of both those experiences. Motivation ebbs and flows, whatever happens. You could be the most committed athlete. You could be an elite athlete and it's their job and they have to. And sometimes you'll feel like it, sometimes you won't. And that's totally normal. On the flip side, it's really great that that person is trying to take some time to rest, because I know so many people, especially from the endurance world, who overtrain, and I totally understand how difficult it is to force yourself to rest when all you feel like doing is go out and do go out and have fun with your friends and train and get better. But it's also a really important part of the process. And so just bear with me when I explain a little bit how I would look at both of these situations. As human beings, we are constantly taking actions throughout our day. And some of these actions that we take are taking us towards our goals and towards the person we want to be, the world we want to build ourselves. And these are towards moves. These are things that are really value aligned and bring us towards our goals. And I'm sure you agree that when everything's going well, when the sun is shining, when you're feeling fit and happy and motivated, then it's super easy to take a towards move. And that feels very satisfying. Now, unfortunately, real life is not like that. And so sometimes things get in the way. And quite often, we then end up taking away moves. And away moves are moves that we take away from our goals, away from the person we want to be and the world we want to build for ourselves. And these are often will fall in two categories: avoidance. So avoidance of a situation that feels uncomfortable, of emotions that feel uncomfortable, and short-term pleasure over long-term goals, the typical thing. And once again, it goes back to our mind's primary role of wanting to keep us safe. And it makes, if our mind's role is survival, why is it going to look at what happens in a year's time? Like, that makes no sense. What it needs to do is make sure you're safe right now. And so that means you feeling comfortable right now and avoiding any potential danger, even if that's a psychological danger. And so what happens is that we have a choice throughout our day, many, many choice points throughout our day, as to whether we take towards moves or away moves. And what will influence that are often those thoughts and emotions that show up when we face up to a situation. So let's take motivation and this idea of not wanting to train. I think the biggest example that most of us can relate to is the alarm goes off really early in the morning. It's maybe still dark outside. It's pouring the rain. You are super committed to, I don't know, your marathon training or, an upcoming goal. And you swore to yourself that you were going to go out and do that 10K run. And you wake up and literally the last thing you feel like doing is get out of bed. Getting out of your warm, comfortable bed, to go out for a run. And then you have all these thoughts coming, I'm tired, I should really be resting, I can do my workout later, but wait, I worked out yesterday, I didn't feel great, I had a niggle. I mean, any of these thoughts and reasons that come up. And what happens is they hook you like a fishing rod, like the fishing rod. And they will drag you towards those away moves of avoidance and short-term pleasure. And the problem is that within an hour, you already feel bad about that decision. You're guilty, you feel guilty about not acting in a value-aligned way and not working towards your goals. So the whole point of this story is that you've got to really ask yourself, when you're facing up to that decision, do I go and train even though I don't feel motivated? You are at a choice point, and you've got to ask yourself, how do I want to turn up as a person? What do I value? What are my values? What's important to me in the way that I show up in this world? So if that's being, let's say, commitment or health or hard work, then those are the kind of values that might pull you in a direction of going to train, right? What are my goals? Remind yourself of the goals that are important to you. Well, I have that, I'm not really sure what this person's goals are, but whatever, I want to be able to land this jump.
Yeah.
And then I would, in my practice, I would teach some unhooking skills. These skills that mean that we can make sure that the thoughts and emotions have less of a hold on us. And that is a way of bringing us closer to those towards moves, or making sure we take those towards moves. And what's interesting with the other part of, how do I make sure I don't get fear of missing out? If you are really clear as to why you decided not to train, well, this is what I value, this is how it's going to help my goals, then it becomes a lot easier to be okay with that decision and to be very clear, I'm intentionally doing this because I know this is what matters to me.
Yeah. And maybe also sometimes sticking to that and seeing how that affects your performance. Because then if you see positives in your performance because you rested that one day or those 3 days that maybe people were out training and you didn't, and then you see positives in your performance, then that's also going to help reinforce it. Whereas if you never experience it, if you always go anyway, then you may well improve. They may teach you something that's really helpful that day. And so you feel like actually that reinforces the fact that I should have gone. And yeah, it depends. Provided that the rest you're taking is correct and is sensible, then actually going through with it will maybe reinforce why you did it and that actually it was a positive for your performance.
Yeah, and collecting that evidence is really important. It also comes back to that confidence we were talking about earlier. I really recommend people keep training diaries. I don't know if that's something you do, Georgia.
Not specifically, actually, no. I keep notes every now and then, but of a few things, but not much, actually. That's interesting. So a training diary, what would that look like after a training session or before a training session?
So the beauty of it is that it can look exactly as you want it to look, and it can be different on different days. But the main thing would be to just keep track of what you're doing. And because I'm a sports psychologist, I like to keep track on how you're feeling, obviously. But it's a really good way, from the confidence perspective, of highlighting the sessions that have gone well, because we have an inherent negativity bias as human beings. We're always going to remember the things that went badly. Once again, it goes back to survival. If all of that negative information can help us survive, whereas the positive stuff, well, whatever, that's not really going to be very helpful. So the main thing is that we need to try and counterbalance that inherent negativity bias that we have, and by highlighting the sessions that have gone well. And one question I love to include in every, after every session is, what have I got from this session, or what have I taken away from this session? Because even the worst session, it could be, well, I showed up and I didn't feel like it. but I showed up. And that is, you know, as we know, it's really important to show up, because with neuroplasticity, it just builds those stronger pathways in your brain and makes it easier the more you do it. So, but the main thing I'd say is is set yourself an intention for each session as well. I think that's really helpful. And it can be, you know, sometimes you might have sessions when you really don't feel like you're capable of much. So maybe setting an intention of, I'm just going to do my best today, or I'm just going to have fun because you had a really stressful day at work or something like that. And sometimes the intentions can be more performance orientated. Well, I'm feeling really good, I'm strong, I'd like to, you know, nail this particular movement.
Yeah, something that really helped me actually with consistency and motivation is becoming a coach, and it is maybe an easy answer, but the moment I started to take up that space and see myself as a coach, the more I was like, the less I had to force myself to go and train, because it was like, no, this is what I do. I've been coaching people all morning. Now I'm going to go train, and I'm going to lead by example and kind of walk the talk. But even if, because not everyone's going to want to become a coach, but even just, and actually a shift I've done in the last 6 months or so is thinking, because now I'm quite an established coach, I don't have to always train, or I don't have to be necessarily pushing my limit. And so now the shift that I've made is actually, no, I want to be a role model for future women. And so if I want that, and I want to embody that, then I have to go out and train. And it's not I have to, it's then I want, quite quickly, it's I want to. But the reason is, okay, because I want to be a role model. And other people who may have a successful career, and not want to become a coach, it could still be like, okay, well, what does this mean to you? What's the role you want to play? And it could be, you know, I've been in the sport for 20 years, I want to continue being in the sport and be a role model. Or it could be, like you say, actually, well, do you know what? It doesn't need to be a big, important role. It's that I love parkour, I always have, even though I feel really unmotivated right now. This is what I do for fun, and I get to do it for fun. Something like that could be the motivator that makes you go, okay, I don't have to be doing this specific running precision today. It's more that I get to go out and train. I'm not injured, or not particularly injured, and I can go out and train, and I get to do this for fun. And how lucky is that? So I don't know, there's a few different ways. It doesn't have to be just becoming a coach is the answer. But it's maybe like reflecting on your role in the sport, or also maybe the sport's role in your life, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've spoken about two main things. It's your values, it's what is important to you in the way that you show up, and really your why, your deeper purpose. Why are you doing this? And I go through this exercise with so many of not only the athletes I work with, but I just like, why are you doing this? What's in it for you? And you'd be so surprised how few people know. They'll just say, oh, well, I like it. But I'm like, okay, but when you're feeling really demotivated, just saying, oh, I'm doing parkour because I like it is not really going to hack it, right? And it's not, it's often, there are loads of things you like doing, but there's got to be something a bit deeper in there. So I keep on digging. Why? Well, you know, why do you like it? Why do you like it? Well, maybe I like pushing my limits, but then why pushing your limits in that way? And I think that element of being an inspiration or a role model to other people, that's much more powerful. And then it really has that that power of giving you that motivation when it's not otherwise there, and you know, and still making sure that you turn up. And that's a big one. I didn't really mention it before, but action comes before motivation. I think so many people think that they wait for motivation to come to then act upon it, but often it's the other way around. Action comes before motivation, and so you just need to find ways of showing up. And I have a couple of techniques as well. For example, I just say, you know, get out there and like cut it down to a much smaller goal. So if you're trying to go on a 10K run, that feels like quite a big task if you're feeling really demotivated. Well, just go out there and set yourself like, I'm going I'm showing up, I'm going for 5 minutes. And often, I think if you are just feeling demotivated, just by the time you're out there, momentum takes over and you start feeling a bit better. And then you can just say, well, let's see 5 minutes more, 5 minutes more. And then you can really get into it. And then I often say, if that's not the case and you're still feeling horrible when you're out there after 5 minutes, just like shorten the session. It's fine, you know? Like sometimes it is okay to say, I feel tired, I'm not into it, I'm going to cut it short. And you know, as long as that doesn't happen every single day, it's not going to affect your training, and it's probably going to help things, you know, long term.
Yeah, I definitely use that all the time. Where this week I felt really motivated, but I think even just maybe 2-3 weeks ago, I was feeling kind of unmotivated every session, and I was like, this is kind of sad. But it was like, but I'm going to show up. I'm going to message a friend, so they're waiting for me, so then I have to go. And then, yeah, I don't have to do something new. I could just repeat things I've already done. For a lot of locations or spots where I train, I have started having a list. So I have a list of like 10 movements that I've already done there that are quite medium easy. They're not easy, they're not hard. And so then I can be like, maybe just go through those. You might not do all of them, but go through, look at them and pick one. And then you're not going in like, what do I do? And then you're just staring at space.
That is the worst. I think the not planning, and I'm sure from the PT side of things, that's always a big one. You know, people turn up to the gym and they have no plan of what they're going to do. And then, of course, no wonder they don't end up having a productive session.
Yeah.
And so if you just have a bit of a plan beforehand, it's definitely really helpful to get you started. And I guess there's the accountability there from a friend that you've mentioned. How can you make it more fun? I think sometimes you can also add some variety. And maybe you were saying that actually the variety is not the right way in your case, but how can you bring some fun into it? Because we have to make sure that we don't take the fun out of things, and I think it can be really easy to lose touch with enjoyment when we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to constantly improve.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, there was definitely one more we were going to bring up, which was, I just need to remind myself, because we talked about limiting beliefs. Maybe we have covered the main ones. I did want to ask you something that I thought about whilst we were talking, which was how to phrase this simply. What does working with a sports psychologist look like? So I don't know if you can say it in a few words. I'm sure it encompasses a lot, but I guess to explain to someone who probably knows, okay, the word sports psychologist, but what does working with a sports psychologist actually entail? I think that'd be interesting.
I think that's a great question because so few people really understand sports psychology. It's quite an emerging field, and still one of the big myths is that it's reserved for elite athletes, whereas all of the work I do in extreme sport is actually with quite beginner recreational athletes, because it's around that fear management, which is not necessarily just an elite athlete problem. It's very much, I tend to do it, 50-minute sessions once a week, once every other week. And it's about, I'll have a client who comes with either a specific issue that they want to work on, or they just want to see some overall improvements. A sports psychologist is taking people, I'd say, from their baseline up to their optimum performance, whereas I'd say a therapist or a counselor is taking people from beneath their baseline back up to their baseline. Very simplistic way of seeing things, but I think sometimes it helps to just dumb things down in these areas. And so we really work on building mental skills and putting in place really practical strategies that you can use when, two things really. It's rewiring your brain in a way. We're talking about those automatic thought patterns that we have and that we've been engaging in for many, many years for most of us. And it's actually building new pathways through that neuroplasticity that we were talking about, and showing our minds that we have more functional and more helpful ways of thinking. And but that's basically building skills, and and then some very specific skills for to be used within, you know, either before or during the performance. We also do elements like pre-performance routines. I think that's something that could be really helpful. Is that something that you do, Georgia, when you're, you know, before a big jump? Do you have a little bit of a routine?
We talk about it a lot in parkour, actually. We talk about, I think, if I understand what you're saying, is that everyone has their own kind of rituals. So, like little habits. It might not be exactly what you're saying. This is more like we have rituals that we might do before a jump, which in principle or in theory should sort of reassure you or calm you. And it might not be a prep. It might not be like doing a jump on the floor. It might be something really simple like wiping your shoes. Well, wiping your shoes is practical because that's like making sure you're not going to slip. But it might also be like turning around. So like turning away from the jump to then look at it and then go.
That's it. Yeah.
And and that's like, you know, in theory isn't making the jump smaller or bigger, but it's just sort of a mental technique to like maybe also calm yourself, collect yourself, and then go back to the jump. And often the first time you look at a jump is the best look you get. The longer you stare at it, often the bigger it starts to look.
Yeah.
So people have different rituals along those lines. But yeah, we talk a lot about rituals and the rituals people have.
And that's exactly what it is. And what you're doing is reassuring your mind that this is something familiar. And by doing this routine or this ritual, whatever you want to call it, it's going to feel quite familiar to your brain. Oh my God, yeah, I recognize this. I know what we're going to do. We do this, and then normally we do a jump and it goes well, you know? And so that's very reassuring because we hate uncertainty. That's like our brain's worst nightmare is this uncertainty. And so if we can use something that grounds ourselves in something that we recognize, it goes back to the hippocampus. It is this memory that, I recognize this. It's familiar. It's okay. I'm safe. And that's very grounding as a feeling. So we would work on that. And it could be just something, as you say, that is a cue. That sounds like what you're talking about. Something like a movement or a word that you use to signal to your brain that you're ready or that you're getting prepared. And we can also sometimes integrate elements of like mental skills in that preparation in itself as well, if we feel that that's necessary. Or visualization. We haven't really spoken about visualization, but visualization is a great tool. And actually, I think I remember a really good question about how can visualization help, I think, land new jumps or learn new skills. Is that right?
What role does visualization play in learning new movements in parkour? I think that might impose the question.
It's a really great tool. Now, the only caveat I'd say is that visualization needs to be done properly, and it's a skill that needs to be learned. And that's why it comes back to that question of like, what's the role of a sports psychologist? It's to teach you the best way of learning these skills, basically. And support you in that learning process, because it's not always easy to do that on your own. Possible to do it on your own, though. Not saying that it's not possible. So with visualization, you really want to be using all of your five senses. And a lot of people might use they can visualize as in they can see what's happening, but they might not think about how they feel when they're landing that jump, or what they can hear or smell or sense. And that, if you have all of those five senses, then you're triggering the same parts of your brain as if you were actually doing the jump. And so you are literally getting practice without getting real practice. So in a in a research paper where they compared basketball players who got to train on the basketball court, and they were training, to get, I don't know what the right terminology is, but get the balls, dunk the hoops, and they compared them with basketball players who just visualized that training. They got the same improvement after a couple of days. And so you can really see that if it's done properly, visualization can be really helpful in building new skills, and also really helpful in building confidence, because once again, visualization is always positive. You're always going to visualize what it feels like to do things in a confident and calm, collected way. So it has a lot of power if it's done correctly, but it can be quite a bit of a longer skill to build, I would say.
That's amazing. I hadn't thought about smell and sound and things like that. I have thought about visualizing the jump, like visualizing. Yesterday I did a jump that's really big for me, but I've done it once before, so I would picture like that time I did it before, and I remembered like where my feet were. My feet were very high, which meant it was actually quite a comfortable jump. I wasn't like stretching myself too far, which means today I should be fine, or yesterday I should be fine as well. I also, but what, for example, I thought about how it's going to feel under my hands. Even though I didn't go and grab the wall, it was just like I was thinking about it's going to feel like this. I'm going to be ready for this. My feet are going to feel like this. One thing I hadn't thought about was sound, which you could use that to, because we know very well the sound of our feet when they hit the wall, and that could be like reinforcing. There's different sounds, but reinforcing the sound that you want to hear. The thing that happens, I don't know if this is a visualization, but sometimes the thing that happens is you're looking at a jump that scares you, and you visualize the negative outcome where you're like, well, often I find myself actually ticking off a few things. Like I'm standing there looking at the jump, and I'm like, if I land too high, it will, with my feet, it will ping my hands off, which is not what I want. So I need to remember, yes, push, but aim for this level on the wall, because if you go too high, it will physically like push you off the wall, which is not what you want. So sometimes I visualize in that sense, but that's more like reminding myself what to do. But you can also have, further than that, you can have like, what if I slip? And then you visualize yourself slipping. What's happening there, or what's your advice on that?
Visualization has got to be always positive, because that is like the number what, even if it, and that's the thing, even if you don't feel like it's realistic, like once again, you don't want to be visualizing yourself, landing a crazy jump that is so outside of your abilities that you don't even believe it yourself. That is pointless. But you want to be visualizing in a way your optimal experience within your capabilities and within something that's realistic. If you're, once again, it's totally normal that you're thinking about the negatives. It comes back to the negativity bias of your mind, and it's telling you, watch out, this is what could happen. I mean, my question is, do you really feel that that's helpful? That it's like you're getting to visualize that whole thing? And I know you've told me that it might help you to prepare, but it comes back to the idea of, is it better to say, don't do this, or is it better to tell yourself, do this? Like they're two marginally similar sentences, but one is negatively formed and the other one is positively formed. And that will have a big impact on your confidence levels and how you decide to approach that jump. I would guess that sometimes if you visualize something negatively, that could set off a threat response of feeling, wow, what if I don't have the resources to do this? What if I slip? So really don't think that that's, in my experience, helpful. And if you do feel like, I didn't think it wouldn't normally be helpful, and it's not how we would normally use visualization. Especially if you're getting ready to, perform and do the jump. I think there's obviously a place for analyzing things a little bit more deeply when you're preparing the jump, when you're working up to it. But when you're performing, when you're actually doing it, you should have decided by then that that's something that's within your capabilities and that you want to commit to it. And if you want to commit to it properly, then having any kind of self-doubt is not optimal. I can actually explain a little bit more about that. Really, what you're doing is that I suspect you've practiced these skills, you've practiced these movements, and ideally they've become semi-automatic. You know, you won't be thinking when you land that jump exactly what's happening to your, I don't know, glutes or your abs, or you might be focusing on one thing like your landing or something like that, but you can't be thinking about how your whole body is moving. It's too much information. And so you're going to be relying on automatic reactions that you have built over your training. And what's great about that, it's a way of thinking that's super quick and very effective. Now, the problem is that if you have doubt that comes in, you then have a second type of thinking that is much slower, that engages your prefrontal cortex around decision making and higher rational thinking. And that's a lot less effective and interferes with that automatic system. And that's why, you know, for example, you have a lot of people who are amazing elite downhill skiers, and they'll have one thread of doubt, and they try and interfere with those automatic systems, and that's when they have a terrible fall, because they've tried to interfere with something that's really quick, automatic, in a much less effective way, and something that's a much slower response. And that's where you get this kind of paralysis by analysis, or this choking that you often get in sport.
That's really interesting, because I understand what you're saying. In parkour, it would be like, when you're first looking at a jump, you would check the surfaces, you would check the stability of the wall, you would check the surface on the very top of the wall where you're going to land, and you would check all those things. And that's, and that is checking for slippage or things like that. And you would do that. But then when it comes to, you're saying, that final moment when you're stood on the starting wall and you're planning to go for it, at that point, this is an unhelpful thought, like, would I slip, is an unhelpful thought. And instead you would want to reframe that as, okay, what are you going to focus on that would mean you won't slip? Which is, for us, it's like to land 2 feet, ideally to land sort of on the corner of the wall and roll up, and it would be with your shoulders soon after coming forwards, because if you're too leaning back, then you could slip out. So instead you're thinking the opposite. You're thinking, right, I'm going to keep my feet together, I'm going to push and really bring my chest over my feet when I land, and thinking that is the positive reinforcement of and visualization of the positive outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I have this acronym that I often work through with athletes. It's quite helpful in those situations, and it's just stop. So whenever you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, if you're second guessing something, the S stands for actual stop, like take a moment. So stop what you're doing, stop whatever it is. T is take a breath, or whatever you need to calm yourself down. What happens is, if you're overly emotional, your rational brain shuts down and is no longer able to look at things in a constructive way. O is observe, and this can kind of depend on the situation. Like, it sounds like you've already made sure that everything is okay, and that you've checked all the surfaces, etc. The observe can often be about what's happening inside, just to acknowledge something like, I'm feeling afraid. However, I know that I can, I'm feeling afraid, that's okay, but I know that this is within my capabilities. And then the P is proceed. And the P is proceed with absolute commitment, and with this idea that it is value aligned. You know that this is what you want to do, and you just go for it, but properly commit to it.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. Stop. I'm going to think about that. We have come to the end. So thank you so much for your time. I think that would be very interesting for a lot of people to listen to. I think I'll give it a few days and probably listen to it back as well. So sometimes when you were talking, I was like replaying it already in my head to sort of sediment what you were saying. So there's a lot in there, and it's very applicable to parkour and parkour athletes. So thank you for that. And I wanted to ask you at the end as well, also where people can find you and if they wanted to find out more or contact you, what they should do.
So my consultancy is called the Performance Psychologist. So often if you just put that into Google, that it will come up. And if not, it's www.theperformancepsychologist.com. And on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram, it's the_performance_psychologist. So that's basically the main ways of contacting me. And I'm always really interested in talking to people and even just directing them to the right resources. So it's always like, please do reach out if you have any questions. I'm always happy to have a chat and, direct you in the right to the right place if that's helpful. I love talking
Mm-hmm.
about anything sports psychology related, and especially within that realm of managing fear and risks. I think it's a really interesting place to explore.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And we are going to wrap up the episode here, but I will be back next week with another episode. And thank you for listening to the Strength of G podcast. If you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed Natasha sharing this, please do leave a comment below or a like, and that to let me know that you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, you can even comment below and leave questions there as well. So I'll look up for those. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Roger.